Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. This is Application Security Weekly, where we present interviews and news on all things AppSec adjacent with detours into DevOps and tangents into current topics. This year, we're kicking in some extra episodes and have a few other surprises in store, including, don't worry, we'll go back to our fun other type of intro format too. But that also means this week we have a conversation with Kinsella, that's right, our very own co-host, and turn to something that sounds less like shift left and more like take left or drop left. In other words, what happens when neither open source nor security receive the investments they need? In the news segment, scams in source code in Web3, your URL parsing problems in SSRF, which is also a tongue twister. AWS Glue binds a little too much data together. Software EOL isn't supposed to mean extension of life, and more. Hit subscribe and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
This is episode 180, recorded January 18th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here on a Tuesday. Everything seems so discombobulated, but I am here still with Mr. John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Oh, shoot. Where's my mute button? Yeah, it's a Tuesday. I'm still happy to be here and looking forward to a fun conversation today.
Fun conversation. Yeah, we're trying not to miss any week whatsoever. So that's why we might shift some of these to Tuesday or pre-record on Friday. So listeners out there, stay tuned and hit that subscribe because you'll get lots of fun things, including two quick announcements before we get into our conversation. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form, please. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. We also had an absolute blast putting together this year's Security Weekly Unlocked virtual event. It's a pretty fun way to end December, close out the last year. All presentations are now available on demand for your viewing pleasure. Please visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register for free and watch now. And that, Mr. Kinsella, usually I hear is where we do the guest intro. But instead, I think our listeners know you. I hope they know me, at least my voice. And we are here to have a conversation about whatever path we can go down from a recent NPM article, of which it almost sounds like a deja vu. But that's all the foreshadowing I'm going to give. To dive right in now, recent article, one of the headlines was Dev corrupts NPM libs colors and faker, breaking thousands of apps. So what was interesting here is that for all the discussions we've had because of SolarWinds and all the discussions we're going to have because of Log4j and supply chain, they're talking about signing and ownership and provenance. But here is a very stark reminder of what happens when we know the provenance and because I love my horror tropes, the call is coming from inside the house, or when the maintainer themselves are the one responsible for the malicious modifications here that, in this case, most recently broke thousands of apps. And I realized I set this whole thing up saying that you were going to get a chance to talk. So I'll say one more thing before you can. This is all. The other thing I wanted just to help set us up was this is also a reminder of the left pad from, I think, 5 or 6 years ago now too. Also an NPM instance of, oops, here's a NPM that disappeared. So I am now going to disappear, Mr. Kinsella, and help us enter into this conversation.
As a famous philosopher once said, oops, I did it again. Yeah, sorry. It's, you said something really interesting there. It caught my attention. And yes, we get to be our own guest this week, so hopefully everyone enjoys listening to us for the next 30 minutes. We'll try and make this interesting. I think it is. Your comment about the call comes from inside the house. Interesting, right? And it sounds like, but that's actually the core of the problem we're having here is the guy is inside the house, but he sort of Trojan horsed himself in. But it's not really a Trojan horse because, well, I mean, it is exactly. It wasn't at the time it was created. Right. So for folks who didn't keep up with this, a little more detail, these two libraries, they've been in use by a ton of places. I can't remember the download specs, but they're pretty crazy high.
There's like 20 million downloads, 19,000 apps. Yeah.
There you go. So it's all over the place. So these were created with everyone's best intent. They've been used by a ton of people. They're quite useful. I'm sure I'm probably using them in one of my apps if I think about it. Time to go check who's running around my own house. But at some point there was a change of heart with the person who had access to the source code and being able to publish that. And they referenced something from a few years ago, for those of us in the world who've been around for a while, Aaron Schwartz. So I don't know if he's been thinking about this. I think it's if they've been thinking about this for a long time, or if they watched some documentaries over Christmas or the holidays or what happened. But they had a sudden urge to complain for more than one reason. Let's say complain. How about put up a protest? So this is a case where it wasn't a Trojan horse, because I think Trojan horse, and I think there was malicious intent there, right? And that's why I'm describing this. So we started off with the concept of, thank you, Aaron Schwartz. Start off with the concept of here's a really great thing, I want you to use it. But you've given someone the keys to your car and you said, here, go for a drive, have a great time in my car. But little did the person who's now in the car realize that you still have the remote controls to be able to actually control what that thing's doing. And that's sort of at the heart of what's going on here. So if there's some things come into your house that you might have known it was come into your house. This comes back partially also to our supply chain issues. So some things come into your house, whether you knew of it or not, it's been working great for a long time. And suddenly, snap, bang, oh crap, what happened to my application? So that's how we ended up here in this lovely situation where we are now.
Indeed. And it touches on a couple things that we've had conversations in the last year on. We had one about the Linux Foundation and a lot of what they were doing to the Open Source Security Foundation as well. And they were doing to improve the ecosystem and investments around open source, because we can even go back as far to Heartbleed as when that was at least 10 years ago, a dozen years ago. I forgot my history right there. But that was OpenSSL, something that everybody was using, and suddenly a really bad vulnerability. Now, a nuance there was that this was a vulnerability that was poor programming or insecure programming. It was discovered. Everybody had to go and patch and rotate their certs. This situation is different in terms of how the flaw got in or what happened, but it's not different in the sense that at the time, OpenSSL was like, everybody knows this is a volunteer project, right? No one gives us money. And everybody's like, oh, cool, let's go donate. And I think at the time, everybody was concerned, and through their kindness of their hearts, they did donate, but OpenSSL raised $9,000, I think was the number at the time. So that's nothing to really pay a salary on. That's not really anything to finance even just a really good, robust test suite. And so suddenly you had a lot of companies that were moving from everyone who they invited into this, invited OpenSSL into their house, to use to run with that metaphor a bit. They're like, maybe we'll kick out this house guest. They're getting a bit drunk, and we're going to write up our own boring SSL or Libra SSL or all these forks or reimplementations of this. With this NPM packages, it's also interesting because it builds up that tension between why do we have to DRY principle? Why do we have to recreate these dozen or so lines, I think it was 17 lines in left pad. There's one famous NPM that literally is a package called isArray that literally is one line that returns a logical function. Is this object an array? Colors and fake are a little bit more than a dozen lines, but still, how much do we invest in how much do we take from open source, I guess is how I should frame that right now, versus investing in it. And that's where clearly the Merrick, I forget his last name, behind colors was that was one of their really big complaints, and why this particular fiasco blew up now.
Yeah, you're thinking. I'm forgetting his name now too. Let me think here. Damn it, you had 2 or 3 thoughts in there. This is what happened. I was trying to Google to get your name, and I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, so I think that the first part I want to bring is that I'm going to sidestep away for a tiny second, and maybe we can come back to this, but I'll throw the cookie out there. It's sort of interesting that the majority of this type of thing we've seen has been around, I'll say JavaScript libraries, but let's back up a step and say software libraries, right? I don't want to make it look like JavaScript is a bad guy here. I'm a little surprised we don't see more of this type of thing with Docker images. It's because as we're describing what's going on there, I was thinking there's a phrase from the previous CEO of Docker, which I've probably said so many times, probably even on here, the idea of additive collaboration, the idea of not having to build all these pieces from scratch, but as I like to say, puzzle pieces, right? So grab a MySQL container, grab a node container, grab all these different pieces, not so much corrupt. Yeah, well, corrupt images, in other words, say someone has one of our Discord guys was asking if I meant corrupt. But imagine you've got an application which is up and running, and now I'm just ignoring the troll. But imagine you've got an application that's up and running, and you didn't pin the versions of the container images you're using, and you restart your app, and for some reason Docker decides when you do a Docker run, maybe it's on a new host which didn't have that image on there, right? So it does a Docker run, does a pull, grabs the latest version of the app, and all of a sudden something has been broken in that same sort of way. Maybe you had an image which had these color pieces in it or something like that, or maybe it's an image just specifically devoted to that. So I'm a little surprised, at least it must be happening. It's not getting on our radar, or maybe just a node library is so much more frequently used than a container image. That doesn't sound right either. I know the quote unquote official images from Docker are reviewed, their pull requests are reviewed by the Docker teams or the community. So maybe that's part of what's going on, but it's interesting we haven't seen more of that. But coming back to this, yeah, it's interesting that this is happening. These little collaborative puzzle pieces, whether they are Docker or anything, that's what allows us to do modern software development and allows us to, do really amazing things. Another analogy out there, maybe not the JavaScript world. Well, yeah, it's JavaScript world. The concept of something like I keep forgetting this phrase, just call me Mr. Forgetful today, a component library. So like the Ant design library or material design or any of these type of libraries, which you can grab a collection of UI components to use in your UI, right? So this is giving you a more visual concept of the same type of thing. Maybe you're using the latest version of someone's component library out there. And the reason you picked that is because you didn't want to go and create all the little switches and arrows and different UI components you'd have in your React or Angular or Vue or any other web, any type of UI, right? I'll say web, but let's keep going and I'll stop with my details. But you picked this component library because someone's already gone to the trouble of creating all these things for you so that when you change, say, hey, I want the radius on my buttons to be 3 pixels instead of 2 pixels, right. It changes across, and that's parameterized and all these type of things. So you're using this, you're happily using it, and all of a sudden someone decides that they want to put a middle finger into one of your icons or something, and that gets published, right? So that's a little more, for the visual thinkers out there, it's sort of the same type of thing, what's happening here. Maybe it wouldn't actually crash the application from work. It would actually be a worse thing if you think about it, right? Because your application is still working and it's publishing and you think everything's great, and all of a sudden you're losing customers and you're wondering what's going on. So that could actually be worse. I really don't want to give people ideas like that, but too late, cat's out of the bag. And that's sort of, that's where we are in this situation. If you are a larger organization, so we're at the point now, my company, that we're trying to figure out, do we want to use a component library or do we want to actually build our own components off of native? Mm-hmm. And the reason you go to the latter is because we want to have a little more control. We don't want a big bunch of bloated stuff we're not using. We know which type of UI components we want. We've got designers designing them, so let's use those specifically and have our own component library we built just for us. I was talking with someone out there, if they're listening, out there earlier today, that they've done something like this for LG, the Korean megacorp, right? They have their own component library of pieces they built. So as you either have more specific details, you might want to do this type of thing with that, and probably the same thing with some of these libraries. You might, start with color or something like that, and then realize that's cool, but there's a lot of bloat in there. There's things I'm not using, and so you might eventually go towards yourself. Building that from scratch, but for the majority of us out there, a lot of the things we want to use, we want to just pick something up off the shelf and run. So there's a level of trust in there. And I'm sort of rambling around here, but bringing this back is there was and I don't know if we're going to post links to these. We'll either throw them in Discord or maybe we'll have them in the show notes later. But there's an article in the Register talking around this concept of like, how do we pay for this? And I'm to make those 2 points together. It's I want to pick up something off the shelf that someone's built, but still I want to get them a coffee, or I want those guys to be able to survive and do things. And sometimes I will individually, as myself, contribute to either Patreon, or I think I back people on GitHub or different things like that. But at a corporate level, how do we do it, right? So there's an article in the Register talking about this, and the examples they use this sort of exact same example. You go to, I think they said, Tatiana and DevOps and say, hey, are you using we talked about Kubernetes, or one of our listeners did, so let's mention Kubernetes. Would you want to donate money back to CNCF for that? And Tatiana's going to go, hell yeah, that's an awesome idea. We use that. That's what allows us to do what we do. I'd love to donate something to them. Now the question is, how do you take that a step back, and how do you get the corporation or the organization, let's say, it doesn't have to be corporate, but how do you get the organization to realize that, understand what's being used, and actually help give something of significant value? Not just like, here's a coffee, but like, how can I either employ you or give you time or something? And that's where this becomes interesting. How do you get that whole circle to work? We've got Patreon doing it for the creators. Which I guess some might call us creators, but this is corporate, so we don't need Patreons. Luckily, we'll take your donations, but at the same time, or actually, exact same thing. Get your corporates to, advertise on Security Weekly. We'll be very happy about that. But how do you do that in open source? So, if you think about a major difference between, let's go this path. See what you think. Major difference between Apache Software Foundation versus CNCF. I've spent a lot of time in both. They both take donations. Apache, due to, and I'm saying this with my member hat on, so I'm trying to be careful. Apache is very careful about how they take donations, and they definitely don't want directed donations. So they want donations to be given to the community, for the community to figure out the direction where to take those, and what needs attention, and needs monitor, or needs resources of some type. Versus CNCF is, I will say, a little closer to the corporations, and they'll take the money and they'll take the donations, either software or resource-wise. And that's, we've now seen how those two different organizations have built out over the last few years. The budget for CNCF is pretty huge. The budget for Apache is also pretty huge. They've been around probably, 3 or 4 times as long. But how those two projects are doing different things is interesting. We had someone on here with, I can't remember his name, the CTO of CNCF, on a few months ago, talking about some of the security stuff they were doing. There's security stuff happening at Apache, but I don't think it's got quite as much structure. They're working on it now. It's actually changing still. I'm sort of watching the conversations. But there's a little more maturity in what CNCF is doing, because they're able to throw more resources at it. I'm not saying that has anything to do with some of the recent Apache projects, which is Log4j, but it's interesting to see, as you take a donation to a different company, how does that, or as you take donations or resources given to different organizations, how are they used? So maybe, Mike, I'll throw it back to you and stop talking here and say, is that the best way to do it? I think there's an NPM org. I'm not sure if they take donations or how they do with that, and I also understand part of the good problem with JavaScript is the number of packages and projects out there is crazy, because everyone's got an idea and they keep running with it. It could be, like you said, it could be 10 lines of code for a color thing, or it could be 10,000. So how where do we go with that? How do we get money into those groups?
Yeah, I love that that's the direction you took, because there is a parallel here with vulnerability finding and bug bounty programs. So that is to say that there's all these web apps out there, lots of others, mobile apps, etc., but that just have vulnerabilities and don't have AppSec teams, their in-house pen testers, or don't have the budgets to go and find their own vulns. Bug bounties came up about that, and that was a way to give some type of remuneration, to use a big word, or just pay some of the folks finding bug bounties, to use more friendly terms, and help with that aspect. Now, the reason I brought that up as a parallel, it is one model of financing and trying to figure out who has the problems or where is the problem and how do we invest in it. That was a problem of, there's a lot of insecure software out there, but with open source, yes, there's still more vulnerabilities we want to find, but for a lot of these programs, a lot of these applications, they don't need yet another horde of people to come in and say, this is broken, this is broken, this is broken. Oh, by the way, this is broken. I could go on till the end of the episode. Instead, they need somebody to say, yeah, we have a backlog. We need somebody to help fix this, to write this, to write this. And this is where you were starting to highlight as well. What's that funding model? Is it Patreon? Is it corporations? Is it donations? One of the things I also wanted to pull into that part of the conversation, we also spoke with Shuber Carr back in August of this year from the Linux Foundation. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was he was pointing out 90% of the Linux kernel code base is written by people in enterprises. So there you have sort of the sponsored patrons, if you will, or the patronage of Merchant Venice, who are the folks writing for the Linux kernel. But that is also because so much of stark amounts of their revenue come from that. Or they need this particular driver to work, or they need this particular function to work, or they need to influence a particular direction of a feature or a roadmap. So that's one of those things that come out, which I think you were sort of getting, you were subtly, perhaps not so subtly, also saying as the distinction between CNCF and ASF. There is another article that I can't remember if we touched on the show or not, but about Rust. Amazon, for example, is putting a lot of their work into Rust, into the leadership of Rust and direction of Rust, but the community then is also, there's a tension there, because some of the community is worried that, does this language, memory safe language, it's a language we've talked about very fondly of and very positively about, but does this become directed by a corporation or a community? And again, there are trade-offs there between money, investment, direction, versus this is a feature that works for our friends, your friends especially, John, have to tease over at Azure if they're using Rust, or Rust going into the browser or Linux kernel or these other things. So it's interesting to figure out, and when we talk about funding, I guess I will try to wrap up that thought in the sense of who's it coming from, and then maybe in our tennis match here, there's also a recent discussion with Log4j. I have to repeat that a little bit, but the White House got a bunch of Google, IBM, a bunch of other big behemoths together and said, we need to do something about investing in security of software applications like this. So one, we need funding, but we also need to figure out, how do we prioritize that? Because unfortunately, something like a Colors or Faker might still fall below that threshold of funding, and that doesn't help. That doesn't really help the maintainer either. And we still have this particular situation.
Yeah. I'm looking for an article I can't find, so I'll come back to that in a second. And Apache was in that room too. I'm not sure if CNCF was, but I know Apache was in that room with the White House conversation last week. And I think that's the really interesting thing, right? So what do you do? Do you go and look at like some of these reports, which we like talking about, of what's the top language, what's the top packages, what's the, do you go and put some sort of, do you start using the metrics which come out from some of these sites like G2 or some of the other ones that like showing like what the top libraries and top packages and top frameworks are, and then say, okay, those need funding? Once you get past some criticality of what X percentage of websites or applications are using this, that means at that point it needs to be. I mean, however you skin that, it becomes very difficult to do. But that's the sort of thing. And where I was going to go, it doesn't make sense, but I'll still say it because I think it really highlights the point. Is I caught myself here, but what I was going to say is it comes back to our other thing we like talking about of secure defaults and secure libraries and frameworks.
Ooh, yes.
But that actually doesn't address this particular point, which is sort of that's where I went, damn it. So you can make, and that's what's interesting about this. You can make something as secure as you want it to, and it really comes down to a resource thing at the end of the day. So if everything in these particular use cases, if we have the best static analysis tools, we've got massive teams of security people that love doing AppSec at say these different open source orgs. Every project for it to be used has to go through, say, CNCF or Apache or any of these orgs. I'm just thinking of those two. So say we put all sorts of craziness in place like this, and still somebody decides that they want to protest through their library. Unless you have people that are actually looking at each, so even if you have someone looking at each release and then sort of giving it a blessing and actually saying that's good for people to use and signing it, the resources to do that are insane. And even if you do that, we've seen instances here on the show where people are doing really great unit tests or really great review or all the right things, and something will still sneak through, right? We've seen it in the App Store, we've seen it in the Google Store, we've seen all these different places. And this is the joy of security, right? We always have the trade-off of how secure do we want to be versus how much do we want to spend on it, whatever that resource is, cash or people or whatever else. And at that, I'll bring it back to the article I was looking for and also a conversation off Discord, which is when you start using these things in life safety, or if life safety is related, so it's either military or healthcare equipment, all these type of things, imagine, and I'm sure this person wasn't thinking this, but imagine what would happen with that color picker library if that was, say, having an effect on a UI component, on a touch panel, on an X-ray machine. I have no doubt that was not what was intended, and they wouldn't probably think about that. And we haven't talked about that aspect too. We'll see if we have time. But the military, I know in the U.S. right now, they had some conversations, or there was an article last week talking about they're thinking about this now. It's like what they want to consume. They are consuming open source, but how do they provide some amount of limits around themselves? And it'll be interesting to see from that point of view, since the U.S. military, I believe, is the largest software development organization in the world. How did they address this? So maybe we'll see some interesting papers out of that later this year.
It'd be interesting, and that brings us into the aspects of the licensing side and indemnification, and a lot of things that honestly are actually set up very well to protect developers and maintainers of open source products from from liability, because there's other. We're then starting to get into discussions of who's responsible for testing, the process there, and so on, which I think would be a great and fun conversation to continue. So I'm going to throw that onto our list for the rest of the year. Another thing I did want to do is that despite the fact that we are importantly talking about open source and investing in open source, and that is where I still want to focus, I do also want to throw out for any listeners who aren't directly involved in pulling in open source dependencies, which I can't imagine there's many, but there may be a few. A lot of the conversations we're having here still apply in principle to legacy systems and tech debt. The idea of, we have this system that was set up and it's been running for 3 years and it's generating revenue, but no team owns it and we don't know what to do with it and we can't turn it off. Now, it's slightly different from the malicious angle, but when we talk about how do we invest, how do we prioritize, these types of conversations are not unique to open source. But they possibly, I think, for the theme of this episode at least, they've probably been neglected for far too long in open source. And I think maybe that's where we have a bit more of the call to action in following on to see what the recent post Log4j, as well as other Salsa and Google, going to repeat them a lot because they've been making a lot of investments in this area to help the Linux Foundation and others elevate the open source security fundamentals. Yeah.
And I think that's hugely important. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to hard right turn on that and talk about the other aspects of this really briefly, yes. Which is the come on, words, man. I've been awake for hours and it's not even a Monday. I can't use any of my standard excuses. But the mental health aspect of this, right? So I think there's some questions, and I am I haven't studied this heavily, so I don't want to. I'm just off some articles I've seen. I don't want to put any sort of aspirations on anybody. I believe in this particular case there has been some signs of distress in the past. I will see with this developer or this author, and it's just we've all been living at home for a year or two, or most of us have been. I haven't been in an office since. Brings a smile to my face in a way, but for those who remember where my last office was, but I haven't been in an office since February. This is 2020. And a lot of us are like this. We're in a room. Hopefully, we have people around. We get to talk to either online or in person or something. But and I sorry, a little bit of my San Francisco liberal comes through. It's like it reach out to people if there's we're on Discord if you want to talk to us. If you want to talk to someone else, if you need to like rant about something. What happened to Aaron was hugely unfortunate, I think. I happen to be on that side of the fence. I know there's multiple sides of that fence. I'm the card-carrying EFFF guy. But, it's the point is still the same of if even as I'm doing right now, hopefully you don't always have to sort of choke your words back and think about what you're saying. But before you publish a new package or put a statement out there that, someone might find controversial, again, wow, the clutch is going really good. I'm keeping my words in my mouth today, but don't feel that like you can't reach out and talk to someone. It's if something's going on like this, if you got a super popular package, I'm sure I've been in situations in the past where I've been on stage and I wanted to say nasty things about people, or believe it, even on this podcast, I do actually hold back most of the time. But still, it's. I want to make sure people realize that there's always a chance to have those conversations. If people sounds like they're not listening to you, try a different forum. I mean, I know I've been hanging out with a group of IRC people for over 30 years now, and sometimes they annoy the hell out of me, and I'll just go and look at a Discord window or a Slack instead. There's always ways to talk and have a chance to do things, or hell, just get away from the computer. That's one of my favorite things. Go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go do something. You don't always have to. I understand that sometimes we have to, be the whistleblower or be the, the Edward Snowdens and really get some light on things. But frequently, there's other ways to do things like this. So I just want to give a little bit of thought and talk and give people a chance to think about that. And hey, if you know someone else they seem like they're in a bad situation, it doesn't have to be, jumping off a building or just doing something very violent, but you still could be doing something which maybe you might regret in hindsight, or hey, maybe he doesn't. But look out for people, say hi, bite him a donut. It doesn't hurt to be nice to everyone around us.
Absolutely. I think that highlights the aspect of the ways of investment is not a cynical, here's a T-shirt for, a bug bounty, or here is a token coffee, which is, can be a cynical token of appreciation, versus there is financial investment. Money can help in many, many situations, but there's also, as you're highlighting, ways of reaching out and listening, which is important, or saying, hey, let's talk, what's going on, as well as to your point, building up better community norms around this. I think we've seen positive things, especially in the last 5 years, that are much, much different from my observations of 20 years ago of the InfoSec and AppSec world, in the sense that Log4j, this was two developers that were struggling very quickly, scrambling, I think is a better word, to understand the patch after patch after patch that was necessary for this, but they were not necessarily getting beaten down all the time, or everybody's saying, you're idiots, this is the most horrible code in the world, this is awful. I think there was a lot of people who had, I'll use the word empathy, importantly, because they said, look at all these places that have Log4j that 2 people are supporting. Maybe we should help them. And one of the things that I think you bring up a great aspect to end on here, I think, to wrap up on, John, is that help comes in from that empathy, an important word that we've brought up a couple times in DevOps and AppSec, as well as just reaching out and having peer support for whatever struggles people are going to, whether it is that technical side or it is that more personal mental health side. And then sometimes you don't have to be a professional to help them. You just have to be someone perhaps that listens, talks to them, or is able to raise awareness or raise alerts to get them help.
Yeah. And it's, as I was thinking there, through some of the experience that I've had with both CNCF and Apache, the community is probably the main reason I'm part of these things. Meeting, the awesome people I've met in both these communities, and going to some of these events and actually being able to talk to people who are excited about the same thing I'm excited about, and actually willing to contribute back and throw ideas around and do some of these really great, awesome things. So I don't want to say that everyone has to be part of a community, or that these individual projects can't exist. But if you're locked in a house and you're looking for a change of pace, go hop on the Apache IRCs, or I think they're doing Slack now too, or the CNCF Slacks, or all these different groups, Discords. Even come hang out with us on Security Weekly. Somebody completely not application security related yesterday posted a resume, like a college graduate. He was looking for feedback, and I think I put my hiring manager hat on, and I talked to the dude for 10-15 minutes. It's it can be all sorts of different things, but at the end of the day, I think you hit the right word there, Mike, with empathy, and we probably all need a little more of that, and I strive for that every day. Hopefully everyone does, but I know it's tough to do.
And time is an intensely personal investment and very helpful. And don't laugh, because I'm going to put you on. I'm going to put you on the good spot here, saying giving that 10 to 15 minutes is time out of the day to help provide feedback for something as small as a resume, and that's another great way to invest within the community, within others. And on that theme of time, unfortunately, we are out of time for this particular episode, or for this particular segment. Sorry, still learning how things are going to be a little bit new this year, but that was our conversation with Kinsella, which I thought was very good. Thank you, John. Thanks everybody for listening and chatting with us on Discord. That helps make it fun too. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll return with news of the week.